Hearing none, I think we're ready for some happy bucks. Don't everybody jump in at once. Lion, do you want to check and see if anybody wants to put a happy buck in?
I have a question.
Anybody? Well, Diane, are you happy? Please.
I'm happy. And how do I send that? Do I just send cash to Terry? How does that work?
You can send a check.
Just okay.
That's fine.
I'm happy because I was able to rebook our Hawaii vacation. We had to cancel Kauai because they have a 10-day quarantine, and I was able to rebook for Oahu in April. So I'm happy.
Awesome.
Oh,
Good for you. Good news. Anybody else? Hands raised. Anybody else happy?
Well, I'm happy. I'm always happy.
Of course you are.
Just am. I don't have COVID. Every day is a good day. So of course I'm happy, and I'm glad to hear that other people are happy too. So that's my buck.
Thank you.
And I'm saving them up, Lion Terry. I'm going to send a bunch together.
okay, that's fine.
Everybody heard that? Is there? We have witnesses to the fact that she's
Yep.
going to eventually send her money in. All right.
I'm happy.
Wanted to put his.
I'd like to suggest a new category called a grumpy bucks.
Ooh, nice.
And Ed.
I could do that one.
More grumpy.
I'm happy because there's Robin, who works at the Heartfelt House, talked to me about she would be glad to put stickers, Lions emblem stickers, on all sorts of things that have been contributed by the Lions in the Heartfelt House, in addition to all the other visibility of Lions and Lions clubs. And I gave her a pretty substantial number of stickers, and she called me a few days ago, and she has run out of stickers. There's so many things that we have purchased, and Sharon had purchased some new stickers that have Eugene Downtown Lions on them, and Terry is sending me a supply of those so we can resupply. But I'm anxious to be able to go into the facility whenever it can be fully opened. It is fully operational and is full steam ahead right now as far as families staying there. They have some limitations on their mobility within the facility, but they're pretty much in full operation. And but anyway, I'm happy because the Lions are getting very adequate recognition for the work that all of you have contributed to that facility.
Lion, Ed, let's be sure she doesn't put those stickers on the kids, okay? Because while we're trying to help them.
When I take the new stickers out, I'll stipulate that.
Okay. Thank you. I just got worried that pretty soon we'd be seeing little kids running around with Lion stickers all over them. Lion Tom had his hand up.
Yeah, yes, I do. I'm happy just in general, like Karen, but I really don't have anything specific to attribute it to. So let me just give a $5 happy buck. How's that? And I guess I'll be fine because my phone went off.
Yes.
How much is that
Lion
for?
Tom, that's a buck. Throw an extra buck in there for that one.
Okay. Very good. Consider it done.
Lion Bob Hickson is muted yet.
Oh, you'll have to unmute yourself, Bob.
There it is.
Okay.
I'm very happy to contribute
Happy Buck just because we're surviving and not getting worse. And we'll be back in service in another 20 days, probably.
Good.
Do you have the COVID now?
No, I do not.
Okay, good.
Well, we're glad to hear things are improving.
Yes.
Yes, very much so. Anybody else? Yes, Lion President.
I would like to contribute 2 happy bucks because I got a call yesterday that tomorrow I can go to the hospital and get a COVID shot.
Really?
Oh,
Why?
Called me.
Because she's over 90 years old.
Yeah.
That's it.
Face it, folks, she qualifies.
I don't believe that.
All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for contributing and for being on the call. Would Corrina, would you be willing to introduce yourself? I think it might be easiest if everyone mutes themselves, and if they have a question, they can put it in the chat box. And for those who don't know where the chat box is, if you go to your screen and you go down to the bottom, it'll say security, then participants, and then chat. And you can open that chat box and write your question in there. That way, as we get towards the end, Corrina will be able to see the questions and she will be able to answer them or answer them as we go along.
Sure.
All right, and we are recording this, Corrina, so we'll be able to share this with the rest of the members who weren't able to come. Chuck Blanchard needed to take his wife to the doctor. We have another Lion who regularly would be wanting to know all about what you're doing. So that
Chuck's
was
on our board, so I hope he knows what we're doing.
Pardon?
I said Chuck is on our board, so I hope he knows what we're doing, but yes.
That's right. Well, and that's probably a good thing to share is who in our club is already involved.
Yeah.
Well, we'll go ahead and give you the floor, and I'm going to put you on speaker view for myself, and everybody else can do that too.
And
that exits us out of the full
you allow
screen.
me to share my screen?
Oh, that's right. I need to make you a hostess. Hostess with mostess. Get back to gallery. Let's see. Okay.
Okay, let's.
You are a co-host.
Okay.
Speak up.
I'm gonna go to speaker.
There we go.
Okay. Can you all see that? Can you see my screen?
Yes.
It says, where are we and where are we going?
Yes.
I have 2 screens, so I want to make sure you're seeing the right one. Perfect. Well, thank you for having me. As far as who's on our board, both Chuck Blanchard and Jeff Musgrove are on our board. Jeff has been on our board for as long as I've been with the organization, and this year's my 19th year. So he's been part of our organization for a long time. Very, very thankful for his involvement. So I've given talks to Lions clubs a million times. And so I thought, oh yeah, I got this. I'll just talk to them about iBanking. And then as I was going into this, I thought, well, a lot of them know what we do. So this is going to be kind of a little bit all over the place. And I'm going to take 2 approaches. I'm going to tell you guys what we do for those people who don't really know what an iBank does. And in particular, our iBank, which is pretty unique in iBanking. So what we do, and then I'll talk to you a little bit about where we're going and what we want to do in light of, you know, this year that just happened and how that impacted us as an organization. So I love this photo because I think it's a good visual representation of what many of you probably who were involved with the iBank when we first started what it was. And I kind of liken it to the original cell phone. It was kind of clunky and it really could only do a couple of things. It could take calls and it could make calls. And that's really what the iBank did. We recovered a cornea and then we sent it to a surgeon, and then everything else was done by the surgeon. And we had really limited capabilities on this middle photo here that you're seeing. We used to have the space that the Oregon Lions Sight and Hearing Foundation is in now. So if we wanted to have a wet lab, we had to reserve a boardroom at the hospital and set up on the board table kind of microscopes. And it was really limited to what our organization could do and was expected to do as an iBank. And at that time, when I started, at least 19 years ago, there were 121 iBanks in the United States. A big number of those were Lions iBanks and supported by Lions clubs. I think there were like 74 at the time of the 121 that were Lions iBanks. And to give you an idea of today, what iBanks are doing is very, very different than what we did yesterday. We're involved in the processing of tissue that used to take place in the OR, the development of new corneal products that are used for different treatments, iBanks are doing. And there are only 48 iBanks left in the United States. And I think probably about 23 of them, last I heard, were Lions iBanks. And that's just from the nature of iBanking has changed. We're a healthcare industry, and the way that transplants are done has changed pretty significantly. And I'll talk to you a lot about why that's the case. So what does our iBank do? So our iBank does some basic procedures. The first one is donor referrals. And so in the United States, all organ, eye, and tissue donation is really kind of ran by the organ banks. So the solid internal organs like heart, liver, lungs, and they are designated a territory by the Department of Health and Human Services. So the territory for Oregon and for our organization is all of Oregon through Southwest Washington, through Western Idaho, so basically through Boise. And our organ bank is required to be given a call anytime someone dies in a hospital that receives Medicare funding, which is really any hospital. But in Oregon, our organ bank recognizes most people are going to be eligible to be eye and tissue donors, not organ donors. It's really rare someone qualifies to be an organ donor. So because of that, they have asked us, Lions Vision Gift, can you take all calls? Can you have the referral center and screen on behalf of all of us? So we take all those initial calls, we screen to see if someone is eligible to be an organ, an eye, or a tissue donor. And then we refer to the appropriate agencies if it's going to be a multi-organ and tissue donor. And we also, if it is going to be an eye donor, we go out and we do the actual tissue recovery and bring it back to our labs in Portland or Boston, which I'll talk to you about. We determine what type of transplant the tissue is suitable for once we evaluate it. Then we process it and prepare it for transplant. And then we determine whether it's eligible. And what that means is we have a group of people that work for us that are called our medical director designees, and they get all of the serology testing that's done on the donor back. They go through the medical chart with a fine-tooth comb, and they basically sign off and say, yes, this tissue is safe to transplant from one human being into another. And then we distribute tissue all over the world, not just locally, not just in the US. We send it wherever it is needed. And then we do all of those steps for research and development tissue as well. So there's the same process happens whether we're doing research tissue or whether we're doing transplant. Our oversight, you can probably see this on the left side of screen, my left, probably your left as well. Our primary oversight in orange from a regulatory perspective is the FDA. The Food and Drug Administration regulates all eye and tissue donation. The EBAA, which is the Eye Bank Association of America, is our accrediting body. They accredit eye banks in the United States. And then our financial oversight and how we're really funded is through CMS. They set the reimbursement standards that insurances abide by. And then in the white, you see all of our local kind of oversight and accountability. Our partners, CTS and PNTB, which are the organ bank and the tissue bank, all of the hospitals we have to interact with, our board of directors and our medical advisory committee that kind of sets our direction. We are kind of all accountable to all of those organizations in a variety of ways. So again, yesterday's iBank really, as I said, someone had a problem with their cornea and you took off a bad cornea, you put on a good cornea, and then it was stitched up. And we did it that way for over 100 years. The first successful cornea transplant was done in 1905. We still do cornea transplants this way sometimes, but majority of what is done today, and when I say today, literally in the last 15 years is when this has changed, is we just replace the areas of the cornea that are damaged instead of taking the whole thing off. And so usually that's just the back layer of a cornea. So where it used to be, we only did this top one here that says penetrating keratoplasty. That's a full cornea. We take off a bad cornea, put a good one on. Now we have about 7 different ways to transplant cornea that we process every week. And by and large, this middle one that says DMEK, Decimase membrane endothelial keratoplasty, is the most common thing we do. Over 90% of the tissue we processed last year in 2020 was a DMEK tissue, meaning we hand peel the cells off the back of a cornea and just provide those cells for the transplant. And the surgery looks very different. The surgery for something like that, the surgeon goes in and just removes the damaged layer of cells on the recipient. They insert a healthy donor layer that we've given them. They put in an air bubble to make it stick. And then the only stitches are just a few stitches in the sclera. Very, very different than the really invasive way of actually taking off that entire cornea. You have much better outcomes, much better visual outcomes for the recipients in this case. Another way that we process tissue, most of the time when we recover tissue, about 75% of what we recover is eligible for us to transplant in this type of surgery, this endothelial keratoplasty, where the cells are viable to be transplanted. 25% of the tissue we recover when we get it back to our lab is medically suitable, but the tissue itself doesn't meet a criteria that a transplant surgeon would want. So in 2014, we said, how can we still use this 25% of tissue in a way that's going to help people, even though it doesn't meet a transplant criteria? So we developed a way to be able to terminally sterilize the tissue so that it can be stored at room temperature for up to 2 years. And it's predominantly used for glaucoma surgeries. When someone has a glaucoma tube shunt put in to lower their pressure, historically it was replaced with, you can see this really bright patch on this gentleman's eye that's in the top corner here. And that is to cover the tube so that it doesn't erode through the conjunctiva, the clear part on the eye. But it's, as you can see, it's really bright and really obvious. And so we developed a way to do that with a cornea. And as you can see on this recipient, you can't even see hardly that there's anything there. You can see a couple little lines where the stitches are on the shunt, but you can't see that bright covering. And so it made it not only cosmetically more appealing for a recipient, but also frequently what happens in a tube shunt coverage is a surgeon has to go in and readjust those stitches. And in the scenario with the original product, they'd have to go in and lift that up and look at those and then lay it back down. Whereas with the cornea, they can see, I do or do not need to go in there. And so it's much easier on the patient. So we do all of this processing at 2 locations. A lot of you have probably been to our Portland location in Southeast Portland. And if you have not, once COVID restrictions are up, we definitely invite you to come up. We love to show people our facility and what we do. But we also have a processing facility in Boston, Massachusetts as well, because we place a lot of tissue on the East Coast. And what would happen is shipping everything from Portland to make a 6 a.m. surgery in the middle of stopping in a snowstorm in Minnesota, we were having delays in surgery. And so a few years ago, we said, why don't we try and mitigate that in some way? And because we were providing so much tissue from the East Coast, we opened a Boston processing facility. Both facilities are just like you would walk into operating rooms in a hospital. We have full ISO certified clean rooms in both facilities. And these photos you see are our technicians doing the processing and pre-cutting of tissue in a way that historically was always done in the operating room by the surgeon. We're really well known for this. We have surgeons and eye banks come from all over the world that we train on how to process tissue. So all of these things that we've been doing, how did 2020 impact what we do and what our mission is? And cornea transplant is an elective surgery. It seems like it would be a necessary surgery. It is necessary surgery, but it is elective. And so when elective surgeries were shut down in March and April, and actually through June and July, depending upon where in the country or where in the world we were sending tissue, we got kind of nervous about, what are we going to do? Because this is the way we're not only funded, but if we can't place this tissue, are we going out on and recovering on these donors, knowing that we can't provide something for this family that's made this donation? So we really looked at our mission early on in 2020. Before COVID really hit, our board got together in February, just a couple weeks before everyone went on lockdown. And we reevaluated what our mission was. And our mission historically, for as long as I've been with the organization, was advancing transplant research and education to honor our donors and their gifts of sight. And the staff had really been saying for years, with all of the new things we were doing, all of the research, all the different places we were helping, that was kind of a limiting mission. It really just described doing things with the cornea. And we're doing so much more, and we're helping people who might not have disease process. It might be a reading or a refractive condition that we started to help. So we really wanted it to encompass any kind of visual problem. And so our board got together, and one thing that did happen in 2020 that was very exciting is we kind of reaffirmed our mission into a new mission, and we created a vision statement. And that vision statement being, everyone has a fundamental right to see, no matter what the issue is that they're dealing with and no matter where they're living. And then our mission from that is always to honor our donors, because we couldn't do any of this if we didn't have donors. And then advancing sight for all humankind. And I'm going to play, hopefully you guys will be able to hear this. I'm going to play this little video.
Well, I opened my eye and I looked at a red object in my home, and the red just came flaring out at me. It slapped me in the face. Wow, that's red.
That's a recipient that Matt, our partner relations manager, has been doing some recordings with recipients. And it's just to kind of take it back to everything we do is because there is always someone on the other end who hasn't seen red before, or hasn't seen it in a long time, or has another issue. And we are kind of that go-between from a donor to someone in need. So throughout 2020, despite the setbacks of stopping surgeries and everything else, we didn't just carry on. We were able to innovate and grow as an organization. We added 24 new people to our staff during this crazy and strange year. I checked this morning, we currently have 88 employees, 7 contract employees. So we have a total of 95 employees now. By the end of this year, we'll have over 100. I know we actually have postings out for at least 4 positions right now. So despite everything going on, we're still able to grow, and people still wanted to, in all this crazy time of training remotely and limited operations, be able to grow as an organization. And we recently did an impact report for our staff, just to give some highlights of, despite everything that was going on and how crazy it felt to staff and how disconnected we felt by not physically seeing each other every day, we were still able to help a lot of people and do some amazing things. We took a record referral volume last year. On average, in our service area, we take about 13,000 death referrals a year. And in 2020, we took almost 17,000. So 4,000 additional referrals, which was pretty huge. We continued processing not only for our organization, but other organizations that weren't set up to be able to process in a time like this. Their tissue would be shipped to us. We would process it for them. We sent out a lot, we distributed a lot of tissue, and there are a lot of returns, it says on here, and that's because it was really strange times, and we'd send tissue out and then it would be canceled because of a positive COVID test that morning on the recipient or whatever it might be. So then getting that tissue back in a timely manner so that we can find a new home for it before it expires, there was a lot of shipments going around. And 2020 was also our first full year of, we signed an agreement at the end of 2019 with the Utah Lions Eye Bank to provide all of their quality assurance oversight. So our quality assurance department is their regulatory oversight for their organization. So if they get inspected by the FDA, our people fly down there and kind of lead that inspection for them as providing all of their regulatory oversight. And we recently did a staff meeting, and we sent out an impact report quiz for people because we had sent it out and we said, you're going to be quizzed, so make sure you read it. And I'm not going to share all the quiz because we had several questions, but there was one that I thought was really powerful that I did want to share with you guys. And so according to our 2020 impact report, how many grafts can be provided to recipients from one donated cornea? And historically, that has always been one. It's a one-to-one exchange, one cornea to one recipient. And after 2020, that number is now 5, because during 2020, we were able to create a new way to process tissue. So now we can say one donor can help 10 different recipients, which is awesome to me that impact can happen. And the way we did that was developing a new way to treat a disease called keratoconus. So keratoconus is a disease that causes the cornea to grow into a pointy cone shape. So on the left, you'll see a normal cornea, and you'll see this kind of thin, uniform shaping that the cornea has. It's uniform thickness. And when someone has keratoconus, that starts to bulge, and when it bulges, it causes the cornea to thin out really badly. And it causes a couple of things. One, it can get so thin that it can ulcer and perforate, which is extremely painful, and you need an emergency transplant in that scenario. But the bigger problem it causes is, when light rays enter our cornea and they land on the back of our eye, that's how we see clearly. And when you have a cornea that looks like this, that's aberration comes through, and that light comes through and lands poorly, and these people can't see, and you can't put glasses over this to correct it. You have to flatten that cornea in some way. So historically, the way they did that was with something called Intacs, and you can see that on the left here. It's these synthetic plastic arc-shaped things that are put into pockets in the cornea to tighten it and flatten it out. The problem with that is it is a synthetic, and our corneas don't love a foreign object. And so what would often happen is it would cause the cornea to melt where those grafts, where they met, and they would come through and perforate the cornea, and then they'd have to be removed, and it can cause scarring and damage to the cornea. So in late 2019, I was at a meeting in Europe, and a surgeon said to me, do you think you guys could cut that same shape out of a corneal tissue and sterilize it? And I'd try and do the same thing as an Intacs. So I took it back to our processing team, and who are brilliant, and they found a way to be able to provide the endothelium for transplant so that someone who needed an endothelial keratoplasty could see, but that remainder of the cornea that's normally wasted, they could turn into these sterilized arcs for keratoconus. So the picture on the side that says Keranatural implant 2 days is the first procedure that Dr. Killick in Turkey did. And hopefully you guys will see this video. It's really short, but this is how simple it is. She cuts a pocket into the cornea that's shaped like an arc, and then she takes the sterile tissue graft that we've sent her, and she just pushes it into that arc. And that simple addition of tissue to someone who has keratoconus causes the cornea to thicken in that thin area and flatten out so that they can see again. And this first patient was a what we say is a -9. So it was like a 2600 vision that was corrected 9 diopters of vision with just that little implant there and was seeing 20/30 within 2 days, which is a huge dramatic change. The other benefit is because it's human tissue, as you can see in this image, it looks a little cloudy, but once the healthy endothelium from that recipient cornea starts pumping through, it gets clear and you won't even see it. So it's pretty phenomenal that in 2020, with everything going on, that could happen and we could have that impact. So what are we looking at in 2020? I put this picture in because one of our board members sent me a card last year, and in it said 2020 is going to be the best year ever. And I found it recently and I took a picture and sent it to her and said, did you want to revise that statement? And she said, sure, cross out that 0 and put a 1. And I was like, pretty good. So all the things we wanted to do in 2020 as an organization, we really didn't get to do because a lot of what we do relies on us being able to, go to meetings, fly and travel and meet with surgeons and do different things that just couldn't happen. So we're kind of looking at 2021 as a reset, even though we know it'll still be a bit of an odd year. So some of the things we're working on, we did do Cara Natural and we're very excited about it, but we do it manually cutting those arcs. We use a tree fine, which is basically like a cookie cutter, and we manually cut them. So they can be uneven, and we really want them to be consistent when we're sending them out to surgeons. So we are looking at getting a laser potentially this year to make sure that those cuts are done really smoothly and we can consistently provide grafts for surgeons. From the distribution perspective, our big thing this year is Salesforce. Some of you guys may have heard of that. It's a big software system. A lot of people use it. And even though we do have software management systems for our tissues, a lot of what we do is really manual, and things like tracking where all these different things we've developed that is no longer just providing a cornea for transplant. We now have halo grafts for glaucoma, and we now have Cara Natural for keratoconus, and we're doing all these things. It's really hard to do manually. And so we're implementing Salesforce to make sure we can manage everything we want to do. We also collaborated this past year with a group called UTR, which is United Tissue Resources. So we're now recovering tissue in Texas, and they are recovering that on our behalf. And so growing that collaboration this year, we're very excited about. And another thing that was really excited that happened in 2020 was an agreement we signed with a company called Melling Medical. They're a small business disabled veterans group that works exclusively providing ophthalmic products into VAs, Department of Defense, and Indian Health Services. And this is their first time providing a tissue. And so they will be representing Lions Vision Gift in 168 VAs, all Department of Defense and Indian Health Services across the United States, which is very exciting for us. And research, retina has been the rage for a while, but definitely in 2020 of the companies that are contacting us, Johnson & Johnson and a big company called Editas, everyone is doing research on retina, because while we can do things like cornea transplant and help people easily who have a corneal problem, we really don't have any solutions for things like macular degeneration, diabetic retinopathy, glaucoma. And so really focusing on those for our research is our plan for 2021. And then donor services, as I said, we took 17,000 calls this year, and we managed to do it really well in a way that not a lot of organizations have figured out. So we've been contacted recently by other organ banks in other states saying, hey, can you take our calls from, Midwest? And so we're looking, I think by the end of the year, we'll be taking on a new partnership and taking calls for another organ bank as well. But first things first, we have to get everyone safe and vaccinated to get back into the office. I will say we're very fortunate. We do fall within phase 1A. So majority of our staff have gotten their first shot. Many have gotten their second shot already because they're in and out of hospitals all day and in ICUs regularly. But we still have a lot of open questions. We don't know what it's going to look like when we do go back into the office. And we've learned a lot this past year, and we've been able to make working remotely work really well. And we've found some things that actually have worked better than when we were in the office. And so we're kind of evaluating, like, what does it look like? What do we want to keep? What do we want to get rid of when we go back? And how will things like new variants impact our ability to go back this year? But regardless, we're very excited about 2021. We have a great team, and we are ready to navigate whatever comes at us. We have a great mission and values and a phenomenally supportive board that has helped guide us. And so we are excited about all we can do this year. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Myself. Thank you so much, Corrina. That was so interesting.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We are
Wonderful.
thrilled to have heard all of that. I will tell you that there were a few things that came up in the chat. Can you look at the chat?
I can't see the chat. That's why I was looking for it. I can't.
Oh,
here we go.
okay. So my question, or what I was wondering if everybody knew what serology is.
So serology is blood testing. So we are required by the FDA to do a series of serological blood testing on every donor. So things like HIV, hepatitis, syphilis, there's a list of what they consider relevant communicable diseases that we have to test every donor on. So serologic testing, when I was saying that in reference to eligibility, is we need to get those results back, and then our medical director designee staff need to clear that and say, yes, they're all negative, or there are some that can be positive, but they have certain placements that have to happen with them. And so they're the people that determine based on that where tissue can go and if it's clear and safe for transplant. From identification to the actual transplant, what's the total time required? So from the time we get a donor until the time that tissue gets transplanted into a recipient for what we call intermediate or fresh tissue, those endothelial transplants, technically, the tissue is viable for 14 days. In the United States, I don't know any surgeon who will accept tissue that is over 6 days old. Realistically, most of the time, tissue is transplanted within 3 or 4 days from death. How do you arrange for transported tissue? Do you have considered using Angel Flight Western? We looked at Angel Flight in the past on some things. Because our timelines are so limited, getting those things arranged ended up taking longer than we had. And so frequently what we do is we'll do a courier systems. So we might courier it. Places like that we ended up using transport for would be if the tissue's in somewhere like Southern Oregon or Eastern Oregon, getting it over. We can usually have our technicians do it. We have some Lions couriers still. A lot of what used to happen with the Lions couriers was they kind of Lions managed the programs themselves. So we had courier contact for a region, and we would call that person. And most of those kind of went away. And so we would have to just kind of call around and hope to find someone, and we'd be calling for an hour, not being able to find someone. So we mostly use private courier service now, just to make sure that we get tissue in a certain timeline. But we do also sometimes, Oregon State Police will also, if we call them and say, hey, there's a snowstorm or there's something and we have tissue stuck in Bend and we need to get it to Portland, they'll courier it. They'll do a kind of a relay and courier it for us. It doesn't happen frequently, but once or twice a year, things like that we would do. Angel Flight has a couple of times transported our staff. So in the past, and this was several years ago, we had a couple of cases where we had a potential donor that was going to time out in like way out in Ontario area. And they flew our staff out and flew them back. But that takes a while to coordinate. And within our timelines, it usually takes a little longer than we have. Is that, Yeah, it depends on the type of transplant, quite honestly. I'm going to guess at 17 years, it was probably a full thickness transplant. It was? Okay. So sometimes they will do a partial thickness underneath a PK. So that happens. It depends on what's causing the cloudiness now. It's probably that endothelial layer. That's what keeps our cornea clear and healthy. So depending upon can I ask who's your cornea specialist?
Oh yeah, I'm blocking on his name. Balamardi.
Balami. I know who you're talking about. Bala on body.
On body. That's it. Yes.
Yeah. He's very familiar and does DMEC a lot. So he would be able to tell you if you could just do a partial thickness underneath that.
Well, he had suggested that as a possibility if the ointments and drops didn't work.
Yeah.
The question was, I guess from my point was, how frequently is it that cornea cells, transplant cells actually die?
It's very common that you would need to be retransplanted, especially if you were transplanted younger. Because I think we usually say around 20 years is what most. Some can go longer, some don't, depending upon the reason for the need of transplant. But usually around 20 years, you'll probably need another transplant of some form. And something less invasive, like a DMEC procedure underneath that, is a much easier surgery than the one you experienced, and generally much more visually successful.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. It was a bit of a shock to find out that the cells were beginning to die, and
it happens.
Okay, thank you.
With a kidney transplant too, they last a certain amount of time, and then you usually need another one.
Well, just one last comment. You've been with the group for 19 years.
Mm-hmm.
Those of us who've been around Lions for that period of time, I mean, the change in what you folks are doing is absolutely incredible. I mean, I'm sure others on this screen are feeling that same way. I mean, I remember when, and to hear what you are now doing is just, all I can say is it's incredible. It's phenomenal.
I agree. It's amazing that something that we did for over 100 years one way,
yes,
in literally the last 10 years really, has changed, as the standard of care as a whole, and what an entire industry went from being to what they have. And that's why the number of eye banks is a lot less now. Is what you used to have to be as an eye bank is so different now, that those smaller eye banks that, they couldn't put in clean rooms, they don't have the technology, they don't have the recovery, they just couldn't survive. So they've either joined with larger eye banks, or they've gone away. And that, I think that's going to continue in the coming years as well. I would guess in the next 10 years, there won't be more than 10 eye banks in the United States overall.
Wow, interesting.
Yeah.
Amazing work. And Corrina, we are at time, but if you have a few more minutes and there are people who have questions, can you stay on for just a few more minutes?
Certainly.
Okay. Thank you so much. This is our virtual applause. We really appreciate you.
Thank you.
It's wonderful work that you're doing. So we can open up to questions. People just raise your hands and she can answer your questions. Oh, good. Jim Mueller has a question.
Just can't ask it.
Hey, no, I'm fine. Sorry. I was just trying to hit the unmute and raise my hand to do it.
It's all good.
So I would just like to say, I serve on numerous boards and have, over the last decades, and I cannot be more proud of my association with the Lions Eye Bank and what they are doing and the people that work there. It is a world-class organization. and you know, Corrina alluded to it, but they are looked to by eye banks and doctors around the world for training, for the innovation that they do, and the reputation that the Lions Eye Bank has is impeccable.
Yeah.
Well, I remember when we were told that in addition to just the corneas that could be, that you would take diseased eyes for research. And that was such a breakthrough. It was like, well, you know, those of you who want to donate your eyes, if they're not in good condition when you die, just forget about donating. And then I remember when you guys issued forth the statement, no, we can take less than perfect eyes because we're doing research. And I thought, you know, that gave some of us who had lousy eyes a hope that maybe we could still have some kind of usefulness after we passed away.
That's really unique too. I mean, and I credit our, you know, Jeff and the members of our board that have really made that part of our mission and what we do, because most eye banks do not do research tissue anymore. It's very expensive to recover. You have to go through a lot of the same process. And it's not reimbursed for us the way that insurance reimburses a transplant. So making sure that we're going to do that regardless of the process because it's necessary is phenomenal. And things like glaucoma, macular degeneration, those type of diseases, there's been huge breakthroughs in the last 5-10 years on that. And it couldn't be done because you can't replicate the human eye. And so that ability and the foresight of our board to say, this is part of our mission and we're going to keep doing it, even though a lot of eye banks are saying we're not going to do it because it's just too expensive, is pretty phenomenal.
I think Ed Gear had a question.
Well, not a question, but I can tell you that this presentation was unbelievably exciting for me, because when the eye bank first started, it started under the Oregon Lions Sight and Hearing Foundation, and somewhere in that 20 to 25 years ago, we went through an
football coaches, our assistant coaches, our support staff,
an extremely traumatic split of the foundation and the eye bank. And it is my feeling, I chaired a committee to try to arbitrate between those two organizations to make a smooth transition, because it was pretty evident that it needed to be done, but the foundation was fighting against it so bad. And all of the things that you just described, or I'll put it the other way, most of the things you described could not have been done without making that split. So the decision that was made, actually, both organizations are stronger, much stronger now than when they were together. And I don't know, because you said you joined about 19 years ago. I don't know how much you participated or understood what was going on at the time, but the right decision, I have an idea, Jeff, you had a pretty good idea of what was going on at that time. And, but we can all be thankful that the outcome was as it turned out. And the eye bank at that time was among the premier eye banks in the country and in the world. And it's even gotten better during that entire 20 or 25 years ago. So thank you for coming and sharing that, because like I said, it was so exciting to know that you're doing what you're doing now versus what was happening back then.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that, Ed. I was around when that was happening, and was very involved in the process. And I appreciate people like you that had that kind of foresight to see both sides of that. And it was hard from us, our perspective, and I'm sure it was equally hard from the foundation's perspective of, you see things from your side and what, like your vision, and we both had great visions, but we didn't see each other's vision in that both parties now, I think, got to achieve that. And so I appreciate you saying that and seeing that, because I agree 100%. I think we've done so much more and been able to kind of elevate the Lions Eye Bank names in a way that I don't think we could have done. And when I see what the foundation's doing now and all the things that they're doing with their glasses program and making that, like, that just wasn't even, we didn't even see that on our side as a potential. So I appreciate you seeing that.
Thank you. Yeah, we could be very proud of both organizations.
Truth.
And it would have been quite different had that separation not taken place.
Well, thank you again so very much, Corrina, for your time and all the work that everyone at Lions Vision Gift is doing and continues to pursue in the way of research. It's amazing.
Yeah, and we hope to, in one of these days here soon, invite you all up to see our facilities in person. So